The crying baby. The millionaire's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane until a shy woman found the courage to do the unthinkable, leaving everyone in silence. "I don't know what to do with you anymore," Jonas Alves exclaimed, as his son Joao's heart-wrenching cries echoed throughout the first-class cabin. His eyes, red from exhaustion, reflected the desperation he felt at being unable to calm his little boy. "Please, Joao, please." The baby, his face red and tears rolling down his rosy cheeks, seemed inconsolable. His tiny fists waved in the air as he rejected the bottle his father was trying to give him for the 5th time. Jonas ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, now slightly disheveled after almost half an hour of battle. Sweat was starting to bead on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. A blonde woman across the aisle sighed audibly and put on her designer headphones with an exaggerated gesture, giving him a look of reproach that Jonas caught perfectly. Other passengers exchanged annoyed glances, though some tried to hide it better than others. "Mr. Alves, do you need any assistance?" asked the flight attendant, approaching with a professional smile that couldn't hide her discomfort. "We're fine," he replied firmly, though it was clear he was lying. In reality, nothing was fine. This trip to Monterrey was supposed to have been simple, to take Joao to meet his paternal grandmother, who couldn't travel due to a recent operation, a flight of less than 2 hours that now seemed endless. Francisca, the nanny, had canceled at the last minute, leaving him alone with a baby he was just getting to know. A baby who had been under his exclusive care after an accident took Clara's life just 3 months ago. Jonas glanced at the platinum watch on his wrist. They were barely 20 minutes into the flight. He felt completely out of his element. At 38, as the CEO of Constructora Alves, one of Mexico's most important companies, he was used to controlling every situation, to having his orders executed immediately, to problems disappearing with a simple phone call. But in front of this small, desperately crying being, he felt absolutely powerless. What do you think is the best way to handle a stressful situation, especially when you feel like you have no control? Let me know in the comments below. Jessica Oliveira squeezed her book against her chest, trying to concentrate on the printed words, but it was impossible. The baby's crying 3 rows behind her wasn't what was bothering her. She had worked for 5 years in pediatrics and was used to children's cries, but the palpable anguish in the father's voice. There was something deeply moving about seeing a man who, by his appearance and demeanor, seemed used to being in control of everything, completely overwhelmed by a baby. From her seat, she could discreetly observe him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a navy blue suit that was clearly designer, a luxury watch, Italian shoes. Everything about him screamed power and money. Everything except that look of pure panic he was trying to hide as he clumsily rocked the baby. Jessica bit her lower lip, debating with herself. She wasn't one to meddle. Her chronic shyness, the kind that had been with her since she was a child growing up in a small town in Veracruz, usually prevented her from offering help in situations like this. She preferred to go unnoticed, to blend in. However, something in the man's desperation and the baby's crying compelled her to act. "It's none of your business," she told herself. "He surely has everything under control, or the flight attendant will help him, or his wife will come back from the restroom at any moment." But the crying intensified, and Jessica noticed how the man constantly checked his phone, as if waiting for instructions or help that never came. She closed her book, took a deep breath, and before her usual insecurity could paralyze her, she stood up. She walked down the aisle with hesitant steps, aware of her simple attire: worn jeans, a gray blouse, and an oversized beige sweater. Compared to the elegant suits and designer dresses that predominated in first class, a luxury she had only afforded herself with a special offer and all her savings for this important trip. She stopped next to the man's seat, who looked up at her with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. The baby was still crying, though he seemed to be getting exhausted, his cries turning into ragged sobs that sounded even more painful. "Excuse me," Jessica murmured, her voice barely audible over the crying. I'm a pediatric nurse. Maybe I can help." Jonas studied her warily. He wasn't used to receiving help from strangers. In fact, he wasn't used to receiving help at all. Since Clara's death, he had made self-sufficiency an obsession, as if accepting support were a sign of unforgivable weakness. "It's not necessary," he replied dryly, as he continued to rock Joao without much success. Jessica felt a pang of pity and was about to return to her seat when the baby let out a particularly sharp scream, followed by a momentary silence in which he seemed to be recharging his strength to continue his crying. In that brief truce, Jonas saw something in the woman's eyes that disarmed him. There was no judgment or condescension, only genuine concern. "He probably has an earache from the pressure," Jessica commented softly, taking advantage of the pause. "It's common in babies this young during takeoff." Jonas hesitated. The woman in front of him didn't seem like a threat. With her brown hair in a simple ponytail, no makeup, and clothes that were clearly not designer, she seemed completely out of place in first class. But there was something in her bouquet, in the way she watched Joao with professional yet warm attention, that inspired confidence. "What's your name?" he finally asked, as Joao returned to his crying with renewed energy. "Jessica Oliveira," she replied, nervously toying with the sleeve of her sweater. "I work at the Children's Hospital in Mexico City." The elderly woman sitting next to Jonas intervened. "If I were you, I would accept the help, young man. My late husband was just as proud, always wanting to do everything alone," she said, with a kind but firm smile. Jonas felt the heat rise up his neck. Was his reluctance so obvious? Joao let out another heart-wrenching wail, and the blonde woman's look of reproach across the aisle intensified. He was trapped between his pride and growing desperation. "Are you sure you can help?" he finally asked, giving in. Jessica smiled slightly, a small smile that illuminated her face, transforming her features and revealing a subtle beauty that Jonas hadn't initially noticed. "If you'll allow me," she said, holding out her arms for the baby. With some reluctance, Jonas handed Joao to her, who for a moment seemed surprised by the change of arms, just enough to pause his crying. Jessica cradled the little one naturally, holding him in a position that seemed much more comfortable than the one Jonas had been using. "Hey there, little guy," Jessica whispered to the baby in a soft, melodious voice. "What's got you so upset, huh?" To Jonas's astonishment, Joao fixed his teary eyes on Jessica, as if evaluating her. She began to rock him with a steady rhythm, while gently pressing her thumb just below the baby's ear, massaging in small circles. "This helps relieve the pressure," she explained to Jonas, who was watching her every move with attention. "Does he have anything he can suck on? A pacifier or a bottle?" "I've tried both," Jonas replied, pointing to the abandoned bottle on the seat. "He rejects them." Jessica nodded understandingly. Sometimes when they're very upset, they reject the familiar because they associate it with discomfort. "May I try something?" Without waiting for a response, Jessica took a small, clean cotton handkerchief from her pocket. With precise movements, she rolled it into a kind of improvised pacifier and brought it to Joao's mouth, who, surprisingly, accepted it, beginning to suck on it as she continued the gentle massage. Gradually, miraculously, Joao's crying began to subside. His eyelids started to droop, and his breathing, once ragged, became more regular. Jonas watched the scene with a mixture of relief and amazement, unable to believe that this stranger had accomplished in minutes what he hadn't managed in half an hour. "How?" he began to ask, but stopped, not wanting to break the spell of tranquility that seemed to have been cast. Jessica smiled shyly. "It's a technique I learned working with newborns. The pressure on planes can be very bothersome for their ears, and the combination of the massage with something to suck on helps to equalize it," she explained softly. "Also, it seems he was overstimulated. Sometimes a change of arms, a different rhythm, can work wonders." As Joao relaxed in Jessica's arms, Jonas felt the tension leave his own body as well. For the first time since they boarded the plane, he took a deep breath. The passengers around them seemed equally relieved, and even the blonde woman had stopped giving him reproachful looks. "I don't know how to thank you," he said finally, watching as his now calm son seemed about to fall asleep in the arms of this stranger, who, somehow, no longer seemed so strange. "Is it ever okay to offer money as a solution to every problem, or are some acts of kindness priceless?" Jessica never imagined she would find herself in this situation, sitting in first class next to an evidently wealthy man holding his sleeping baby. After Joao calmed down, Jonas had insisted that she take the empty seat next to him, arguing that it would be more comfortable for everyone. The truth was, he was afraid that if Jessica returned to her original seat, the baby would wake up and start crying again. "So, you live in Mexico City?" Jonas asked softly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "Yes, I've worked at the Children's Hospital for 5 years, she replied, keeping her voice a whisper. "And you?" "In Mexico City too, although we travel quite a bit for business," he said, watching his sleeping son. "Normally Francisca, the nanny, comes with us, but today she canceled at the last minute because of a family emergency." Jessica noticed something in his tone when he mentioned the nanny, a mixture of frustration and something deeper, like guilt. She decided not to pry. It wasn't her place to ask personal questions. "Joao is a beautiful baby," she commented instead. "How old is he?" 6 months, Jonas replied, and a shadow crossed his face. "His mother, she passed away 3 months ago. A car accident." The confession, so direct and without preamble, took Jessica by surprise. She didn't expect this man, who initially seemed so reserved, to share something so intimate with a stranger. "I'm so sorry," she said sincerely, feeling a lump form in her throat. Jonas looked away, toward the window where the clouds looked like an endless sea of cotton. "Thank you. It's been complicated," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. "Clara was the one who took care of Joao. I worked too much, traveled constantly. I was barely learning to be a father when she—" His voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat, as if reminding himself where he was and who he was talking to. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." Jessica gently shook her head. "Don't apologize. Sometimes it's easier to talk to strangers," she said, offering a compassionate smile. "Besides, I'm used to listening. In pediatrics, a big part of the job is reassuring worried parents." Jonas watched her more closely. There was something about Jessica that inspired confidence, perhaps her direct but gentle way of speaking, or the natural way she held Joao, as if she were born to care for others. "And you? Are you traveling to Monterey for work or pleasure?" he asked, trying to change the subject. Jessica hesitated for a moment. "For work, in a way," she finally replied. "I was offered a position at the new pediatric hospital in Monterey. The final interview is tomorrow." "Would you move from Mexico City?" "If I get the job, yes," Jessica admitted. "The salary is considerably better, and I could get a supervisory position in the neonatal unit." As they talked in low voices, the flight attendant approached to serve drinks. She offered champagne to Jonas, who declined and asked for mineral water. Jessica also asked for water. "Would you mind holding Joao for a moment? I need to get something," Jessica asked after the flight attendant left. With some apprehension, Jonas held out his arms. Jessica transferred the baby with extreme care, guiding Jonas to properly support the baby's head. To his surprise, Joao didn't wake up, but snuggled against his father's chest with a small sigh. Jessica took the opportunity to pull a small notebook and a pen from her bag. Quickly, she wrote something down and handed it to Jonas. "It's my phone number," she explained at his questioning look, "in case Joao gets restless again during the flight or, well, in case you need any advice for the trip back." Jonas took the paper with his free hand, accidentally brushing Jessica's fingers. It was a brief contact, but for some reason, it made both of them look directly into each other's eyes for the first time. "Thank you," he said, putting the paper in his shirt pocket. "That's very kind of you." The conversation flowed naturally after that. Jonas told her about Constructora Alves, the family business he now ran, expanding throughout Mexico and starting projects in Central America. Jessica talked about her work at the hospital, the children she cared for, how she had decided to specialize in neonatology after her residency. "And your family? Are they in Mexico City too?" Jonas asked. Jessica shook her head. "My parents live in Veracruz in a small town called Los Naranjos. My father is a primary school teacher, and my mother runs a small grocery store." "Do you miss them?" "A lot," she admitted. "I try to visit them every 2 months, but it's not always possible with the hospital shifts." Joao stirred slightly, and they both fell silent, expectant. The baby briefly opened his eyes, looked at his father with a sleepy expression, and fell back asleep. Jonas let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "It's amazing how calm he is," he commented in a very low voice. "He's usually more restless." "Babies perceive their caregiver's stress," Jessica explained. "Maybe now you're also more relaxed, and he notices it." Jonas considered her words. It was true that he felt calmer, despite the unusual situation. For the first time in months, he wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't thinking about contracts or meetings. His attention was completely focused on the present. His son, this kind woman, the conversation flowing between them. "Can I ask you something personal?" Jonas said after a moment. Jessica nodded, although a slight blush colored her cheeks. "Why did you choose to travel in first class?" "It's not that," he was quick to clarify. "What I mean is, you mentioned that the job in Monterrey would offer a better salary, so I assumed that I can't afford to travel in first class regularly," Jessica finished with a compassionate smile. "You're right. It's the first time I've ever traveled like this. The truth is," she hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to share something personal. "My mother is sick. Nothing serious, but she needs an operation that's not covered by insurance. The job in Monterrey could help me pay for that operation faster. So when I received the invitation for the final interview, I decided to allow myself this small luxury. As a good luck charm, I guess." The sincerity of her response struck Jonas. He was used to people trying to impress him, who exaggerated their achievements or pretended to be what they weren't to gain some benefit. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed to have no qualms about admitting her financial situation or her motivations. "That's admirable," he said sincerely. "Your dedication to your family." Jessica shrugged, visibly uncomfortable with the compliment. "It's the normal thing to do, isn't it? To do whatever is necessary for those we love." Her words, so simple yet profound, resonated with Jonas. Was he doing what was necessary for Joao? Or was he taking refuge in work, delegating his responsibilities as a father, Because it was easier than facing the reality of raising his son without Clara? The plane experienced slight turbulence, and João stirred in his father's arms. Instinctively, Jonas pulled him closer to his chest, protecting him. To his surprise, the baby didn't wake up, but held on to his father's tie with his tiny hand. "He has a good grip," Jessica commented with a smile. "That indicates excellent motor development for his age." Jonas looked at his son with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Clara used to say the same thing, that he had strong hands, just like his. "Can I ask why you're going to Monterey?" Jessica inquired, sensing that Jonas needed to change the subject. "My mother lives there. She's recovering from a hip operation and can't travel. I wanted her to meet her grandson," Jonas explained. "It's the first time João will see her." "That's a beautiful gesture," Jessica said. "I'm sure it will mean a lot to her." Jonas nodded, and for a moment he seemed lost in thought. "You know, I don't remember the last time I had a conversation like this," he finally admitted. "Without interruptions, without talking about business or problems to be solved. Sometimes the simplest things are what we need most," Jessica replied. The captain announced that they would begin their descent into Monterey shortly. Jessica looked out the window, watching the clouds begin to disperse, revealing the city stretching out below them, with the mountains of the Sierra Madre Oriental silhouetted on the horizon. "I should go back to my seat for the landing," she said, though she made no move to get up. Jonas looked at her, suddenly aware that he didn't want this conversation to end so soon. "If João gets restless again during the landing, and he will," Jessica assured him with a small smile. "The pressure affects them more during descent than during takeoff." "Then, would you stay?" Jonas asked, surprising himself with how much he wanted her answer to be yes. "As a medical consultant, of course. I'll pay you for your time." The offer, though well-intentioned, made Jessica's expression change. Something in her eyes dimmed slightly. "You don't need to pay me," she replied with a certain rigidity. "I'll help you with João during the landing, because I'm concerned for his well-being, not for money." Jonas immediately realized his mistake. Jessica's face had tensed, and the warmth of her gaze had been replaced by an invisible but palpable barrier. He cursed himself for his clumsiness. Of course, offering her money had been inappropriate, even offensive. He was so used to solving everything with money that he sometimes forgot that there were people who acted out of simple kindness. "I apologize," he said quickly. "I didn't mean. It's just that I'm used to." "You don't need to explain yourself," Jessica interrupted, recovering part of her smile, though it now seemed slightly forced. "I understand that for you, it's normal to compensate for services, but helping a baby will never be a service to me. It's simply the right thing to do." Before Jonas could respond, João began to stir restlessly in his arms. The plane's descent had begun, and just as Jessica had predicted, the pressure was starting to affect the little one. "He's starting to feel discomfort in his ears," Jessica commented, instinctively holding out her arms. "What do you think is the best way to handle a mistake? To apologize with words, or to show through actions that you've learned?" Jonas handed her the baby, grateful for the change of topic. He watched with fascination as Jessica once again applied the same massage technique near João's ears, while speaking to him in a low, melodious tone that seemed to calm the baby before he could start crying. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, genuinely interested. Jessica continued the circular movements of her fingers as she replied. "During my residency, I worked in a neonatal unit with premature babies. Many of them had ear problems due to their incomplete development. An older nurse, Doña Consuelo, taught me these traditional techniques that she combined with conventional medical treatments. The results were surprising." "It seems like you have a natural gift with children," Jonas observed. A genuine smile illuminated Jessica's face. "I've always felt a connection with them. My mother says that since I was little, I had the ability to calm my cousins when they cried." She paused and added with some shyness, "I guess it's because children don't judge. They don't care if you come from a humble family or if your clothes aren't designer. They just respond to sincerity and affection." Her words, though said without reproach, made Jonas question how much of his own behavior had been conditioned by unconscious prejudices. When he first saw Jessica, hadn't he judged her based on her simple appearance, assuming she didn't belong in first class? The plane experienced a slight turbulence as it passed through a cloud. Joao let out a small whimper, but he didn't cry, thanks to Jessica's constant attention. The flight attendant passed by, instructing everyone to straighten their seats for landing. "You know, you haven't told me your first name," Jessica commented suddenly, as if she had just realized it. "Jonas. Jonas Alves," he replied, surprised that he hadn't formally introduced himself until now. "I thought you already knew, considering that." He stopped, not knowing how to continue without sounding pretentious. "Considering you're a well-known businessman," Jessica completed with a compassionate smile. "I don't follow business news much, and when I'm outside the hospital, I prefer to completely disconnect. My world is quite specific." There was something refreshing about her honesty. Jonas was used to people knowing his name, his company, his fortune. For someone to treat him simply as a father, without the weight of his last name or his position, was curiously liberating. "And what is that specific world like?" he asked with genuine curiosity. Jessica seemed surprised by the question. She slightly adjusted Joao's position before answering. "My life is divided between the hospital, my small apartment in the Roma neighborhood, and occasional visits to my parents in Veracruz," she explained. "It's not very exciting, I suppose. I read a lot. I walk in the park when the weather allows, and sometimes I go to the movies, although mainly documentaries or independent films." "It sounds peaceful," Jonas commented, imagining a life so different from his own, full of meetings, trips, social events, and the constant pressure of running a multinational company. "It is," Jessica nodded. "After a 12-hour shift, surrounded by medical emergencies and babies fighting to survive, tranquility becomes a necessity, not a luxury." The plane began its final descent toward the runway. Joao stirred again, and Jessica intensified the massage, softly humming a traditional Mexican lullaby that Jonas recognized as the same one his own mother used to sing to him as a child. "My mother used to sing me that song," he commented with nostalgia. "It's beautiful, isn't it? My grandmother taught it to me," Jessica replied. "Some things transcend generations and social classes. Lullabies are universal." The comment, said without malice, made Jonas reflect. In his world of exclusivity and privilege, he sometimes forgot the fundamental human experiences he shared with the rest of the people, regardless of their bank account. The plane's wheels touched the runway with a slight bounce. Joao opened his little eyes, startled by the sound and sensation. But before he could cry, Jessica pulled him close to her chest, forming a kind of shield with her body against the noise and vibration. The baby, feeling her warmth and protection, relaxed again. "It's impressive," Jonas murmured, observing the natural way Jessica calmed his son. "Francisca, the nanny, is efficient, but different. More professional, less maternal," Jessica suggested. Jonas nodded, although the word caused him a pang of pain as he remembered Clara. The plane finally stopped, and passengers began to stand up, eager to get out. The flight attendant announced that they could unbuckle their seatbelts and get their hand luggage. "I guess this is where we part ways," Jessica said, preparing to hand Joao back to his father's arms. Jonas felt a strange reluctance to end this encounter. In the almost 2 hours of the flight, this woman had managed not only to calm his son, but also to make him feel, for the first time in months, that he could let his guard down, that he didn't have to pretend to have everything under control. He began to speak, not sure what he was going to say. I would like to, that is, if it's not a bother. She looked at him expectantly, holding a delicate Joao. Do you have a car waiting for you? He finally asked. I could offer to drive you to your hotel or wherever you need to go. Jessica seemed to hesitate. That's very kind of you, but I wouldn't want to cause you any more trouble. I'll just take a taxi to my hotel. I insist, Jonas said with renewed firmness. It's the least I can do after your help. Besides, I wouldn't want Joao to have to say goodbye to you so abruptly. He might get upset again. It was an excuse, and they both knew it. But Jessica smiled, apparently moved by his clumsiness in trying to prolong their company. All right, she finally accepted. Thank you. They left the plane together, Jonas carrying the hand luggage, and Jessica holding Joao, who seemed completely comfortable in her arms. As they walked through the airport corridor toward the exit, Jonas noticed the glances of other passengers. They blindly assumed they were a family, mother, father, and son, traveling together. The idea, instead of making him uncomfortable, gave him a strangely comforting feeling. Upon reaching the baggage claim area, Jonas saw a man in a suit holding a sign with his name on it. My assistant has sent a car, he explained to Jessica. Roberto will take care of the luggage. Do you have a suitcase to pick up? Jessica nodded, slightly intimidated by the protocol. A small, navy blue one with a green tag, she described, as Joao began to stir restlessly in her arms. I think someone is waking up, Jonas commented, watching his son open his eyes and begin to stretch. And he's probably hungry, Jessica added. When was his last feeding? Jonas checked his watch and realized it had been more than 4 hours since Joao had eaten. Before we boarded, I have a bottle prepared in the diaper bag, but I'm usually quite clumsy at giving it to him, he admitted, with a mixture of frustration and embarrassment. Clara always used to say that he held him as if he were a fragile package instead of a baby. Jessica smiled at his sincerity. I can show you how to do it correctly if you'd like. It's not complicated. It just takes practice. Jonas felt a wave of gratitude toward this woman, who, instead of judging him for his limitations as a father, offered him help without condescension. Roberto approached with the suitcases, and together they headed for the exit. The car, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, was waiting in the reserved area. Which hotel are you going to? Jonas asked, as the driver loaded the luggage. To the Hotel Mirador, Jessica replied. It's not very luxurious, but it's close to the hospital where I have my interview tomorrow. Jonas knew the hotel. It was decent, but basic, located in a commercial area of the city. We're going to the center first, to my mother's house, and then to the Santa Lucia, he said, mentioning one of Monterrey's most exclusive hotels. The Hotel Mirador is on the way. We can drop you off there first. The interior of the car was as luxurious as Jessica had imagined. Beige leather seats, polished wood on the panels, and a subtle, clean scent that indicated meticulous maintenance. She sat in the back seat next to Jonas, while Joao began to show signs of hunger, waving his little hands and making small noises of protest. I think it's time for his bottle, Jessica said, watching the baby. Jonas searched the diaper bag and pulled out a small thermos and an empty bottle. With movements that betrayed his lack of practice, he tried to pour the lukewarm milk into the bottle, spilling a little on his pants in the process. Allow me, Jessica offered gently, taking the thermos and the bottle. With efficiency, She prepared the feeding and checked the milk's temperature by dropping a few drops on her wrist. Jonas watched her every move, aware of how much he had to learn about caring for his own son. "Now, hold him like this," Jessica instructed, handing him Joao and guiding his arms to form a proper angle. Head slightly elevated, resting in the crook of your elbow. And the bottle, like this, tilted so he doesn't swallow air. Jonas followed her instructions, surprised by how natural it felt once he found the right position. Joao began to suck avidly, his little eyes fixed on his father's face. "It's working," Jonas murmured, with a tone of astonishment that made Jessica smile. "Of course it works. He's your father. Joao recognizes your voice, your smell, the way you hold him. You just need practice and confidence." The car drove through the streets of Monterey, moving from the airport to more central areas. Jessica looked out the window, observing the city that could become her new home if tomorrow's interview was successful. "Nervous about tomorrow?" Jonas asked, catching her thoughtful gaze. Jessica turned to him, surprised by his perceptiveness. "A little," she admitted. "It's a big opportunity, but also a big change. Leaving Mexico City, starting over in a place where I don't know anyone." "But you're doing it for your mother," Jonas reminded her, referring to their previous conversation about the operation she needed. Jessica nodded, nervously toying with the edge of her sweater. "For her, and for me, the position comes with research opportunities. I've always wanted to contribute beyond direct care, maybe develop protocols that can be implemented in hospitals with fewer resources." Her passion was evident when she talked about her work, and Jonas found himself admiring her dedication. In his corporate world, he rarely found people motivated by anything other than power or money. Joao finished his bottle, and Jessica showed Jonas how to place him against his shoulder to help him burp. When the baby let out a small burp, they both laughed, sharing that moment of parental satisfaction that Jonas had rarely experienced. "You have a gift for this," he commented, as Joao, now satisfied, played with his shirt button. "It's not a gift," Jessica replied. "It's experience and affection. You also have it within you. You just need to allow yourself to discover it." The car stopped in front of a 7-story building with a discreet facade. The Hotel Mirador was not ostentatious, but it looked clean and well located. "We've arrived," the driver announced. Jessica picked up her small backpack from the seat and prepared to say goodbye. For some reason, she felt a strange reluctance to end this encounter, even though she knew it was the right thing to do. She and Jonas belonged to completely different worlds. Their paths having crossed for a few hours had been a pleasant coincidence, nothing more. "Thank you very much for the ride," she said, extending her hand to Jonas in a formal gesture. "And good luck with your visit to your mother." Jonas shook her hand, noting how small and warm it felt in his. "Thank you for everything," he replied with sincerity. "I don't know what I would have done without your help on the plane." Joao, as if he understood they were saying goodbye, stretched out his little arms to Jessica, making a protesting sound. The scene touched both adults. "It seems like someone doesn't want to say goodbye," Jonas commented, trying to hold his restless son. Jessica leaned in and placed a soft kiss on the baby's chubby cheek. "Be good to your dad, little one," she whispered, feeling a lump in her throat. In just a few hours, she had grown fond of the baby. She was about to open the car door when Jonas spoke again. "Jessica, what time is your interview tomorrow?" "At 10 in the morning." "Why?" Jonas seemed to hesitate for a moment before continuing. "We'll be in the city for 3 days. My mother is anxious to get to know Joao, but we won't be able to stay with her all the time due to her recovery. I was wondering if, perhaps, you might consider helping me with Joao during our stay, as a temporary consultancy." Jessica blinked, surprised by the proposal. A consultancy? Yes, Jonas nodded, gaining confidence. You could show me how to better care for him, teach me those techniques you used on the plane. Of course, I would pay you generously for your time, and we would work around your interview and any other commitments you have. Seeing Jessica's cautious expression, he quickly added, not as an employee, as a professional consultant. From a doctor to a first-time father, Jessica considered the offer. On the one hand, the idea of spending more time with Joao was tempting. On the other hand, the nature of the proposal made her uncomfortable, as if she were accepting a favor disguised as work. I don't know, she replied honestly. Tomorrow is an important day, and I need to focus on the interview. Of course, Jonas nodded. How about this? Think about it tonight. Tomorrow, after your interview, if you decide to accept, you can call me. He took a card from his wallet and handed it to her. It wasn't a corporate business card, but a personal one, with only his name and phone number. No pressure, he added with a smile that conveyed sincerity. Regardless of your decision, I wish you the best of luck tomorrow. Jessica took the card, looked at it for a moment, and put it in her jeans pocket. Thank you. I'll think about it, she promised, finally opening the car door. The driver had already taken out her suitcase and was waiting for her next to the vehicle. Jessica said goodbye to Joao one last time with a caress on his chubby cheek, and to the man who, in just a few hours, had gone from being a stranger to someone with whom she felt an inexplicable connection. As the car drove away, Jessica stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching it until it disappeared around a corner. Then, with a sigh, she picked up her suitcase and went into the hotel, trying to convince herself that it was best to forget this strange encounter and concentrate on tomorrow's interview. The receptionist checked her in efficiently, giving her the key to her room on the 5th floor. It was a simple but comfortable room, a single bed, a small desk, and a basic but clean bathroom. Nothing comparable to what was surely Jonas's suite at the Santa Lucia, she thought with an ironic smile. She fell onto the bed, exhausted physically and emotionally. The day had been surreal, from the anxiety about the trip and the interview to the unexpected meeting with Jonas and Joao. She took out the card he had given her and looked at it thoughtfully. Should she accept his offer? Or was it better to keep her feet on the ground and remember that they belonged to completely different realities? With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Jessica went to the bathroom to freshen up. She had to review her notes for the interview, prepare her clothes for tomorrow, and maybe take a walk around the area to familiarize herself with the hospital's location. She couldn't allow herself to be distracted, no matter how charming a pair of infant eyes and the unexpected vulnerability of a powerful man might be. Meanwhile, Jonas's car arrived at an elegant residence in one of Monterey's most exclusive areas. His mother's house, Mercedes Alves, was a colonial-style mansion with spacious gardens and service staff. Despite her recent operation, Mercedes had insisted on receiving her son and meeting her grandson in her own home, rather than having Jonas visit her at the hospital or recovery center. "Are you nervous?" Jonas asked Joao, who was looking at him with his big eyes, now calm after having eaten. "Grandma is anxious to meet you," the baby responded with a babble, as if he perfectly understood what his father was saying. Jonas smiled, remembering Jessica's words about how babies perceive and respond to their caregivers. Upon entering the house, they were greeted by Marta, the housekeeper who had served the family for over 20 years. "Mr. Jonas, what a pleasure to see you," the woman said, with a warmth that contrasted with her usual formality. "And this must be little Joao. How beautiful." "How is my mother?" Jonas asked, while Marta admired the baby with expressions of tenderness. "Anxious to see you both. She's been asking every 5 minutes if you had arrived," Marta replied with a smile. "She's on the covered terrace, following the doctor's orders to get fresh air, but not too much sun. Jonas nodded and headed toward the back of the house, where a spacious terrace with a glass roof offered views of the garden. There, sitting in a reclining chair with a special cushion for her operated hip, was Mercedes Alves, a 65-year-old woman whose elegance had not diminished with age or recent surgery. "Son," she exclaimed upon seeing him, trying to sit up. "Don't get up, Mom," Jonas warned, quickly approaching her side. Mercedes ignored his advice and, leaning on a cane, managed to stand up to receive her son, and, more importantly, finally meet her grandson. "Let me see him," she asked, holding out her arms for Joao. Jonas hesitated for a moment, remembering how difficult it had been to calm the baby on the plane and fearing a repeat of the scene. But to his surprise, when he placed Joao in his grandmother's arms, the little one looked at her with curiosity, and then, as if he recognized her in some way, gave a toothless smile that lit up his face. The next morning dawned with a clear sky over Monterey. Jessica woke up before her alarm went off, with a mixture of nervousness and excitement fluttering in her stomach. She took a few moments to organize her thoughts as she watched the golden sunlight begin to filter through the curtains of her hotel room. The interview at the pediatric hospital was at 10, but she had decided to arrive an hour early to familiarize herself with the place and calm her nerves. She dressed in the only formal outfit she had brought, a navy blue skirt, a simple but elegant white blouse, and a blazer of the same shade as the skirt. It wasn't designer clothing, but it was clean, ironed, and gave her a professional look. As she brushed her hair, her gaze drifted to the nightstand where she had left Jonas's card. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about him and little Joao during the night. The proposal to help him during his stay in Monterey was still going around in her head. On one hand, the idea of spending more time with them was strangely appealing. On the other, wouldn't it be better to keep her distance from a man whose world was so different from her own? Focus on the interview, she told herself, putting the card in her purse. That was the real reason for her trip, the opportunity that could change her life and her family's. At 9 o'clock, Jessica was already in front of the impressive building of the Monterey Pediatric Hospital, a modern glass and steel structure that contrasted with the more traditional buildings in the area. She took a deep breath and went in, heading to the reception desk where a middle-aged woman greeted her efficiently. "Good morning. I have an interview with Dr. Ramirez at 10, Jessica explained, trying to make her voice sound confident. "Your name?" "Jessica Oliveira." The receptionist typed something into her computer and nodded. "Yes, here it is. 5th floor, Human Resources Department. I suggest you go up now." Dr. Ramirez tends to be early for his appointments. Jessica thanked her and headed for the elevators. During the ride, she mentally reviewed the strengths of her resume. 5 years of experience in neonatology, specialization in premature babies, participation in a pilot project on alternative techniques for pain management in newborns. She had excellent references and knew she was good at her job. She just hoped to be able to convey that confidence during the interview. Upon reaching the 5th floor, she was greeted by an assistant who led her to a conference room where 3 people were already waiting for her. Dr. Ramirez, head of the neonatology department, Dr. Fuentes, medical director, and Mr. Vega, from the human resources department. "Miss Oliveira, welcome," Dr. Ramirez said, a man in his 50s with an affable expression. "We appreciate your punctuality." The interview began with standard questions about her training and experience. Jessica answered clearly, gaining confidence as the conversation progressed. When they asked her about the alternative techniques project she had participated in, her passion for the subject became evident, and she noticed how the interviewer's interest increased. "Your integrative approach is fascinating," commented Dr. Fuentes. "We are specifically looking to implement more humanized protocols in our neonatal unit." The interview lasted for almost an hour. In the end, Mr. Vega explained the next steps. "We have 2 more candidates to interview this week. We will inform you of our decision by next Monday at the latest." He paused and added, "But I must say, Miss Oliveira, that your profile is exactly what we're looking for." Jessica left the hospital with mixed feelings. The interview had gone well, better than she expected. The 3 interviewers seemed genuinely impressed with her experience and approach. However, now came the most difficult part: the waiting. She checked her watch. It was just past noon. Her flight back to Mexico City was scheduled for the next day at 11 a.m., which meant she had the rest of the day free. She could tour the city, visit a museum, or simply rest at the hotel. It was then that she remembered Jonas's card in her purse. The idea of calling him fluttered in her mind. Would it be appropriate? Or would it be better to let that chance encounter remain a pleasant memory, without complications? As she walked aimlessly, her phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "Good morning, Jessica. I hope your interview went well. Joao is asking for you, in his own way. If you decide to accept my proposal, we'll be at Fundadora Park this afternoon, near the lake, no pressure." Jonas. Jessica stopped dead in her tracks, surprised. How had he gotten her number? Then she remembered that she had written it down on the paper she gave him during the flight. An involuntary smile appeared on her face as she imagined Joao asking for her. After a moment of reflection, she replied, "The interview went well, thank you. I'll be at Fundadora Park around 3 p.m. As soon as she sent the message, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Was she making the right decision? She didn't know, but something inside her was pushing her to go ahead. She decided to go back to the hotel to change into more comfortable clothes. As she walked, she allowed herself to think about how unusual the situation was. Just 24 hours ago, she was an anonymous nurse traveling to an important interview. Now, in addition to being a promising candidate for a coveted position, she was about to meet a millionaire and his baby in a park. Life could certainly take unexpected turns. Jonas read Jessica's message with a smile. He was on the terrace of his mother's house, watching Mercedes hold Joao in her lap, telling him stories as if the baby could understand them. The instant connection between grandmother and grandson had been surprising, especially considering how difficult Joao usually was with new people. "Good news?" Mercedes asked, noticing her son's expression. "Something like that," he replied evasively. "A work matter that seems to be resolving favorably." Mercedes looked at him with that intuition only mothers possess. "That doesn't look like a work matter smile to me," she commented perceptively. "It looks more like an interesting personal matter smile." Jonas couldn't help but laugh. At 38, his mother still read him like an open book. "It's complicated," he finally admitted. "I met someone on the plane yesterday, a pediatric nurse who helped with Joao when he wouldn't stop crying." Mercedes's interest intensified visibly. "A nurse? And is she pretty?" "Mom," Jonas protested, though without true annoyance. "It's not what you think. I proposed that she help us during our stay here, as a kind of consultant for Joao. She's very good with him." "I see," Mercedes replied with a smile that suggested she saw much more than Jonas was admitting. "And does this consultant have a name?" "Jessica," he replied, aware that his mother was building a whole story in her mind. "Jessica Oliveira. And is it strictly professional?" "Of course," he said, and Mercedes nodded. "Completely professional to hire a complete stranger you met on a plane to help you with your son, when you have access to the best nannies and nurses in the country." Jonas had no answer for that. The truth was that he himself didn't fully understand why he felt this need to see Jessica again. He only knew that the natural way she had connected with Joao, the sincerity of her words, and the total lack of pretension had impacted him more than he was willing to admit. "We're meeting at Fundadora Park this afternoon," he finally said. "If you don't mind watching Joao for a while I talk to her." "Talk to her?" Mercedes interrupted with feigned innocence. "I thought the idea was for her to help with Joao." Jonas felt slightly trapped. "Yes, well, first I need to explain exactly what I need from her," he justified, not sounding very convincing even to his own ears. "Of course," Mercedes nodded again, exchanging a knowing look with her grandson. "Joao and I will be perfectly fine. Take all the time you need to explain what you need from her." Jonas decided that the wisest thing to do was not continue that conversation. He knelt to kiss his mother's forehead and Joao's little head. "I'll see you in a couple of hours," he promised, leaving before Mercedes could make more perceptive comments. Now in his room, Jonas found himself contemplating what to wear, as if he were a teenager getting ready for a first date. He laughed at himself. This wasn't a date. It was a meeting to discuss a professional arrangement. However, he couldn't help but carefully choose a casual but elegant outfit. Dark jeans, a light blue shirt, and a casual blazer. As he got ready, his mind constantly returned to the previous night. After arriving at his mother's house, he had spent hours reflecting on the encounter with Jessica. There was something refreshing about her authenticity, in the way she spoke directly, without the filters and hidden agendas he was used to in his corporate world. And then there was the way Joao had responded to her. His son, who was generally wary of strangers, had immediately felt comfortable in her arms. "Babies have a sixth sense for people," his mother had told him last night, when he briefly told her about Jessica's help on the plane. "They instinctively trust those who are genuinely good." Fundadora Park glowed under the afternoon sun, with its wide green spaces and the artificial water reflecting the blue sky. Jessica arrived a few minutes before 3, wearing jeans, a turquoise blouse, and the same beige sweater from the day before. She had spent more time than she cared to admit deciding what to wear, constantly reminding herself that this wasn't a date, but a conversation about a possible professional arrangement. She sat on a bench near the lake, watching the families walking by, the children running, and the couples sharing quiet moments. The park, built on the grounds of an old steel foundry, perfectly represented transformation. Something industrial and cold, converted into a space of life and human connection. "Right on time," Jonas's voice surprised her, appearing from a side path. Jessica stood up, immediately noticing that he was alone. "And Joao?" she asked, unable to hide a certain disappointment. Jonas smiled, sensing her reaction. "With his grandmother. I thought it would be better to talk first, without distractions," he explained, though the real reason was that he wanted this moment alone with her. "Shall we walk?" Jessica nodded, and they began to walk along the path that bordered the lake, maintaining a slow pace and a respectful distance between them. "How did your interview go?" Jonas asked. "Well, I think," she replied cautiously. "The medical team seemed interested in my experience, especially in the alternative techniques for pain management in newborns." "And when will you know if you got the job?" "By next Monday at the latest." Jessica paused, although the human resources manager hinted that my chances are good. Jonas nodded, feeling a strange mix of joy for her and a selfish thought he didn't want to examine too closely. If she got the job, she would stay in Monterey. "Congratulations in advance, then," he said sincerely. "It would be a great opportunity, wouldn't it?" "It would transform my life," Jessica confirmed. "I could pay for my mother's operation, maybe even bring her to live with me eventually." They walked a little further in silence until Jonas stopped next to an old industrial furnace preserved as a monument. "Jessica, about my proposal. Before you continue," she gently interrupted, "I need to clarify something. I can't accept money to help you with Joao." Jonas looked surprised. "But it would be a job, a professional service," he argued. "You deserve compensation." Jessica shook her head, her hazel eyes reflecting a quiet determination. "What happened on the plane, the connection with Joao, wasn't professional. It was human," she explained. "If I'm going to spend time with you during your stay, I want it to be because I genuinely want to help you, not as a transaction." Jonas watched her, disconcerted by her perspective, so different from what he was used to. In his world, everything had a price, every service a fee. "Then, how do we frame it?" he finally asked. Jessica smiled slightly. "As a friendship, I can show you techniques to better care for Joao, accompany you on some outings to make sure he's comfortable, but as a friend, not as an employee." "And what do you get in return?" Jonas insisted, genuinely confused. "The satisfaction of helping," she replied simply, "and the company of that little one who, I must admit, completely won me over." Jonas felt something warm expand in his chest. This woman, with her simplicity and honesty, was challenging every concept he had about human relationships. "Can I ask you a personal question?" he asked, and when she nodded, he continued, "Why is it so important for you to do this without compensation?" Jessica thought for a moment, looking toward the lake. "When I decided to become a pediatric nurse, it wasn't for the salary," she began. "It was because I saw the power of an act of kindness. My younger brother was born prematurely, and a nurse named Louisa took care of him, as if he were her own son. She spent extra hours with him. She sang to him. She even came in on her days off. When I asked her why she was doing all that, she told me something I never forgot. Some connections are beyond professional duty. My brother survived thanks to medicine, but he thrived thanks to that nurse's love. Since then, I've tried to honor that legacy. Money is necessary to live, but some things shouldn't have a price." Jonas was silent, processing her words. In the month since Clara's death, he had taken refuge in what he knew: work, efficiency, delegating responsibilities through financial transactions. He had hired the best nannies, but he had never asked himself if Joao needed something more than technically perfect care. "I accept your terms," he finally said. "Friendship without financial compensation." Jessica's smile lit up her face in a way that made Jonas's stomach flip. "Then where is that little conqueror?" she asked, visibly more relaxed. "I hope he hasn't been giving his grandmother any trouble." "Quite the opposite," Jonas replied, leading her down another path. "He seems to have found his favorite spot on my mother's lap. They're at the cafe near the museum." As they walked, Jonas found himself telling her about Clara, how they had met in college, their rushed marriage when she got pregnant, and how, despite the love they felt, their careers had gradually distanced them. "I regret so many things," he admitted. "The meetings I didn't attend, the ultrasounds I missed because I was closing some important deal." "You can't change the past," Jessica said softly. "But every day is an opportunity to honor her memory by being the father Joao deserves." They arrived at the cafe, a modern structure with large windows overlooking the garden. Through the glass, Jessica could see an elegant older woman holding Joao, who seemed absolutely content playing with a small rattle. Upon entering, the baby seemed to sense her presence. He turned his little head, and upon recognizing Jessica, stretched out his arms to her with excitement, babbling excitedly. "It seems like someone remembers you," Mercedes commented, watching her grandson's reaction. You must be the famous Jessica." "Famous?" Jessica asked, blushing slightly as she approached to say hello. "My son hasn't stopped talking about you since you arrived yesterday," Mercedes replied with a knowing smile, and by Joao's reaction I can see he wasn't exaggerating. Jonas cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Mom, this is Jessica Oliveira." "Jessica, my mother, Mercedes Alves." "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Alves," Jessica said respectfully. "The pleasure is mine, dear. And please call me Mercedes," the older woman replied, evaluating her with an appreciative look. "Would you like to hold this little one? He hasn't stopped moving since you came in." Jessica needed no more invitation. She took Joao in her arms, and the baby immediately snuggled against her chest, grabbing a lock of her hair with fascination. The naturalness of the scene deeply moved Jonas. "They have chemistry," Mercedes commented, observing them. "Some babies just know who really loves them." The four of them spent the next hour in the cafe. Jessica and Mercedes discovered they had more in common than they would have imagined. They both loved gardening, preferred physical books to electronic ones, and shared a passion for traditional Mexican cuisine. "You should try her tamales," Jonas said, remembering the ones his mother used to make on special occasions. "They're legendary in the family." "I would love to learn the recipe someday," Jessica replied enthusiastically. Mercedes looked at her with approval. "Anytime, dear. My home will always be open to you." As the afternoon turned into evening, they decided to take one last walk through the park before returning. Joao, comfortably settled in his stroller, watched with curiosity as the leaves on the trees swayed in the breeze. Mercedes had insisted on walking a little, ensuring that moderate exercise was good for her recovery. "I'll leave you two alone for a moment," the cunning woman said, stopping next to a craft stand. "I want to buy some souvenirs." Before Jonas could protest, his mother had already walked away, pushing Joao's stroller. "She's quite transparent, isn't she?" Jessica commented, with an amused smile. "She always has been," Jonas replied, grateful for his mother's intervention, despite his initial embarrassment. "Jessica, these 2 days have been different from anything I've experienced in a long time." They stopped next to a fountain, the sound of the water creating a bubble of intimacy in the middle of the park. "For me too," she admitted. "I never imagined that a crying baby on a plane would change my perspective on so many things." Jonas gathered his courage and gently took her hand. To his relief, she didn't pull it away. "I don't know what will happen when you go back to Mexico City tomorrow, or if you'll get the job here in Monterrey," he said sincerely. "But I do know that I want to continue getting to know you beyond these days." Jessica looked him directly in the eyes, without the shyness she had initially shown. "I want to continue getting to know you too, Jonas," she replied. "And Joao? They are special to me, even though we barely know each other." In that moment, as if he had been waiting for his cue, Joao let out a joyful squeal from his stroller, where Mercedes had strategically positioned him near them. The three adults laughed, and the tension of the moment dissolved into a warm complicity. "I think he just gave his approval," Mercedes commented, with a triumphant smile. As the sun began to set over Fundadora Park, painting the sky in orange and golden tones, Jonas understood that what had begun as the desperate cry of a baby on a plane could be the start of something beautiful and unexpected. He didn't know exactly how this relationship would evolve, but for the first time since Clara's death, he felt hope for the future. And Jessica, watching this man and his son in the golden light of the sunset, understood that sometimes the most unthinkable acts born of kindness could transform not only the lives of others, but also her own. Perhaps the real gift hadn't been her help to Joao, but the opportunity to discover that sometimes lonely hearts can find each other in the most unexpected places.